Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about the second, third, and fourth films of the long-running Friday the 13th franchise. These movies were released between 1981 and 1984. And although made only 1 year after the original movie, Friday the 13th Part 2 picks up the story 5 years after the events of the original film. Pamela Voorhees' murderous rampage against the councillors of Camp Crystal Lake is now old news. However, although Mrs. Voorhees was slain by the last of her intended victims, her death hasn't actually made these woods any less dangerous for attractive teens. A new killer is on the loose, one who would ultimately become the franchise's iconic figure in much the same way as Freddy Krueger did for the various nightmares on Elm Street. This is Pamela's son, the long believed dead Jason Voorhees. Another year later in the real world, Part 3 emerged. It kicked off by reusing footage from the end of Part 2 and then splicing in a few new shots, which is a useful tactic to both quickly establish that Jason isn't as dead as he appeared to be at the end of the previous film, and also to save money in the process. Jason promptly goes on another killing spree, massacring yet another crop of attractive teens before once more seemingly meeting his own end. And the makers of Part 3 did actually intend that Jason be dead for real this time, which led to the absence of a 1983 release for the franchise. But when a movie's box office is 15 times its production budget, the seductive strains of the sequel song will soon be heard. And so another outing for Jason emerged in 1984, once more planned as the final entry in the franchise, and this time openly marketed as such, being subtitled as The Final Chapter. Now, that didn't end up being the case, but it does make it a good place for me to split my assessment of the franchise. Now, structurally, Part 4 does a lot of the same things as the previous entry. It quickly establishes that Jason isn't dead after all, and then brings in a new gaggle of good-looking young people to get murdered in various gruesome ways. In my opinion, however, it executes it all much better than Part 3. More about that later. So the original Friday the 13th cost about $500,000 to make and brought in somewhere close to $60 million at the box office. And with that kind of return, the quick move to produce a sequel is hardly a surprise. The first film's director declined to participate in that sequel, and Adrienne King, who was the movie's sole survivor, returned only in a very brief cameo. Budgetary concerns may have played a part in this decision, but another significant factor is that after the success of Friday the 13th, King was pursued by a male stalker who, among many other scary actions, at one point accosted her and held a gun to her head. The experience would lead to King avoiding all on-screen roles for over 25 years, during which time she became an experienced and well-regarded voice actor. Thankfully, later final girl actors in the franchise do not seem to have suffered the same kind of experiences. But in any case, these films each returned over 30 million in ticket sales against budgets of just over 2 million, a positive box office outcome, quite at odds with their critical reception. This was strongly negative, sometimes vitriolically so. Roger Ebert called Part 4 an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash, for instance, which is quite the statement from the man who wrote Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens. But here's what I think of these films. So you may have noticed that my synopses of these three movies were all pretty scamped and all pretty similar. You may have also noticed that they sounded a lot like the original Friday the 13th. And frankly, that's pretty much the case. It's particularly noticeable in Part 2, which, other than jettisoning the mystery element of the first film, such as it was, otherwise delivered exactly the same thing. A bunch of pretty young people being offed in creative ways before the last survivors have a climactic showdown with the killer. Now, I will acknowledge that Part 2 is a technically better film in a number of ways. The potential victims have more strongly defined characters, the cinematography is good, and of course it is the first appearance of the killer who would define the franchise, and to some extent slasher films in general, Jason Voorhees. Plus, it's a movie with a Chekhov's chainsaw, and that's the kind of silliness I can applaud. On the other hand, given how hard Part 2 leans on the original film in setting things up, and how thoroughly it appropriates the plot structure and sound design of that movie, it's hard to see it as a fully successful standalone film on its own merits. Also, you will need to ignore the fact that the whole motivation for Pamela Voorhees' rampage was that Jason died in a drowning accident, because this movie sure will. Ultimately, Friday the 13th Part 2 is a competently made slasher film that launched a horror icon in Jason Voorhees, albeit in a very different form from his iconic look. And it's worth a watch if you like this kind of stuff, but it's not a film that will change your mind about the genre it helped to found. Nor does it show any desire to be the kind of film that could change your opinion about the genre. But at least Part 2 wasn't in 3D. Part 3, alas, was made during one of Hollywood's sporadic spurts of enthusiasm for the tiresome trickery of this technique, and was in fact the first ever 3D film to receive a wide US release, opening on over 1,000 screens. And the film sure does lean into the 3D shtick, in particular by finding a lot of opportunities to have stuff come flying at the screen. A rake, an axe, the spear from a spear gun, a wallet, popcorn popping in a pot. I wish I was joking about that last one, but I am not. Now, I don't think this kind of gimmickry adds anything to a film at the best of times, and in this case, it appears to have significantly harmed the production. Multiple actors on the movie have noted that getting the right shots with the 3D effects invariably trumped the quality of performances. Or, to directly quote one of them, it didn't matter how the lines were delivered. Now, of course, given the script, I'm not sure even the greatest of line delivery would have helped. It's perhaps apropos that this film kicks off by literally splicing in the last 5 minutes of the previous movie. It's a presumably unintended warning that this whole film is a lazy rehash of its forerunner, which was in and of itself a rehash of the series' progenitor. All you're going to get here is Jason stalking and killing a whole bunch of people, because people being stalked and killed is pretty much the raison d'etre of slasher films. I mean, sure, you will need to ignore that none of the motivations for killing that were previously ascribed to Jason continue to apply here, but actually paying attention to such things would be work that this movie is not interested in doing. Part 3 is a lazy, lazy film, even by the standards of slasher movies, being just some 80-odd minutes of Jason killing thinly drawn characters you probably won't care about for reasons the film never bothers to explain. If I were forced to name a positive of this movie, I would point to the final girl fight, which is the most ambitious such encounter yet offered by the series. But frankly, the most entertainment I got out of this movie was savouring how gloriously stupid all of the jammed-in 3D exploiting sequences look when you're watching a 2D print of the film. You should see Part 3 only if you're a slasher tragic, or if you want to experience the true horror of knowing that, witless and tawdry though this is, it is far from the nadir of the franchise. Now, with the trajectory of the franchise to this point, it might have been expected that Part 4 would crater even further in quality, but whatever Roger Ebert may have thought of it, I don't think that's the case. I mean, sure, the basic plot structure is not going to change. Jason is going to once again get up from his seemingly fatal injuries and begin hacking up attractive teenagers, and he will be well served on that front. There are no less than 10 such teens on hand, and almost all of them are well and truly focused on getting laid, which in Friday the 13th land is pretty much signing your own death warrant. Much of the film will be occupied by either A, young ladies showing bare skin, or B, people being murdered with various household items. So far, so Friday the 13th, right? And, in fact, to the extent that the Friday franchise ever truly penetrated popular consciousness, this film brings together almost all of the main factors. Jason Voorhees is the killer, he wears a hockey mask, he carries a machete, and he murders nubile teens. The final chapter is replete with titillation of both sexual and violent kind, and has approximately zero interest in anything but bosoms and murder. It is unabashedly here to give its primary audience plenty of what they want and not bother with any diversions or details that might distract from that. So why do I, as well as a number of other much more qualified critics, consider this film to be so much better than the previous two entries? I think the answer is the instructions the film's director, Joseph Zito, gave to screenwriter Barney Cohen. Don't try to think of new ways to kill kids, because people have seen everything. Just make the kids real, like your after-school special kids, and whatever we do to them will be horrific. Cohen responded by crafting characters that were, if still quite shallowly written, much more memorable and distinctive than the largely indistinguishable nitwits of the previous movies. There are actually stakes here in who lives or dies, and that makes a huge difference. If you're looking for the iconic Friday the 13th experience, this is the movie to watch. It's the whole franchise distilled into a single 90-minute romp with satisfyingly memorable finale. Next time, the best Conan film of the 21st century, even though Conan isn't in it. It's 2002's The Scorpion King. But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've seen any of these Friday the 13th films, let me know what you thought of them.